Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hello everyone. So let's start our next topic here, that is changes in the 19th century. Now students, before this we were talking about the pre-modern world, right? We also understood the term globalization. Am I correct? Yes. Now here students, you have understood that this globalization, it did not happen all of a sudden. Now it was a century-long process that was taking place since ancient times. And you have understood it through various examples like the Silk Route that existed in ancient period, the conquest that was taking place in the medieval period, right? And also the alternative trade routes that were being introduced or that were being discovered by the European powers. So all these factors somewhat were responsible for globalization, a term that was used in modern sense, right? So here now in this topic, we are going to talk about the changes that took place in the 19th century. And we are going to understand in the context of globalization. So here we are seeing that the economists, they have tried to identify three types of movements or flows within the international economic exchanges. Again, please remember, we are talking in context of globalization. We know that globalization, here it means movement of people from one place to another and interconnection between them, right? Various factors are responsible for it, correct? So here we are talking mainly about this movement, the type of flows that existed in the 19th century. So according to the economist, there were three main types of flows. The first one is flow of trade. Now, what does flow of trade mean here? It means that transporting of goods from one place to another. This was one type of movement that was taking place. The second one is flow of labor, as in people migrating from one place to another in search of good living condition, let's say living condition or any other factors, right? The third movement is the movement of capital. Movement of capital here, it means overseas investments that was done by a lot of European powers, right? The rich European countries. Now students, let's talk about the late 19th century colonialism. Now till now, you have learnt about the situation of 19th century or the things that were happening in 19th century, right? We understood about the three flows here, the three types of flows that was happening there according to the economists, correct? So what was happening in the late 19th century here? And the term colonialism, that is again not new for you. Now in your previous chapters also, you have heard the term that is colonialism. So here what was happening students? The dominant powers, especially the European powers, they were now colonizing different regions, making colonies everywhere. To gain what? First thing was for trading purpose or for political or let's say economic domination in those regions, right? Now, the trade flourished and markets expanded in the late 19th century. And again, you have learnt about this, right? You can totally connect with the whole idea here. So when I'm saying late 19th century, what do we understand by it? So let's say after 1850s, 1860s, what are we seeing? That trade is flourishing all over the world. Why? Because different European powers, they were now extending their domination in different regions. And how was it happening, students? It was through trade only, right? Also, markets were expanding in this situation, right? So it also led to many social, political, economic changes in the world. Definitely, students. Now, when we are talking about the interconnection of different countries here, so we can see that there will be certain changes in terms of the social change, the economic change, political change, and so on. So that was happening in the late 19th century. And the best example here is that of Africa. Now, why are we talking of Africa, students? Because in the late 19th century, let's say after 1880s, what are we seeing here? That the great European powers, they are now establishing or acquiring the territories of Africa. And we are going to understand it through this map here. So in 1885, the big European powers, they met in Berlin to complete the carving up of Africa between them. They knew that Africa was not a wealthy nation. Like the European powers, they were very much powerful as well as wealthy nations. But here what are we seeing? That African people were living on their lands. They had abundant lands and also livestock. But were they powerful? No. They were not able to stop the big European powers in acquiring these territories. Right? And there were certain circumstances that led to this colonialism in different regions of Africa. But here you have to understand how the European powers, they are acquiring these regions. So in 1885, all these big European powers, they decided to carve out the map of Africa. So before we see that the borders were running quite straight in Africa. But again, because of this carving out of African map, what are we seeing? Irregularities in the map of Africa. Now look at this region here. Again, I would like you to emphasize on this map, right? Let us see these European powers. Who were these European powers who were acquiring these different regions? So the first one here is Britain and France that made vast additions to their overseas territories in the late 19th century. First here is British and France. Now look at the map, students, that I am trying to denote here. British region, where this, the pink region that you are seeing on the map that I am pointing out, these were the regions acquired by whom? So these were the regions acquired by the British Empire. Right? The next one is France. Here French, that is the mustard color. As you can see, this is the French Equatorial Africa, French West Africa, right? So these were the regions acquired by French. Belgium and Germany, they also became new colonial powers in the region. Now looking at Belgium, the light green color, the Belgian Congo here. This was the region acquired by Belgium. And talking about Germany, so this region, German Southwest Africa. So what are you understanding through this map here, students? We are seeing that the big European powers, they were now acquiring different territories. And how is it helping in globalization? Now we learned that many factors were responsible for globalization, right? And trade or technology or moving from one place to another, that is one of the basic things that we have learned. So we see that how these colonial powers, they are coming in these regions, trying to enhance this region, and also through conquest and colonialism, how are they trying to change the culture here or impart their own culture here. Right, students? So these are some of the points that you have to remember. The US also became a colonial power in the late 1890s by taking over some colonies held by Spain. So this is how all these European powers, they are coming together and they are taking on different regions. Now coming to our exercise section, there is one question. Explain the three types of movements identified by the economists in international exchange. Now, how are you going to answer this question? Here you have to talk about the three types of movements. Now, do you remember those movements? First one is flow of trade. That is movement of goods from one place to another. Second one is flow of labor. That means people migrating from one region to another for better living condition, right? The third one is flow of capital. Now what does this signify? This signifies the overseas investment by the colonial power or the powerful regions. Correct? So these were the three types of movements identified by the economists in the 19th century, about which you have learnt in this section.